Okay, our next speaker is ready to go, Anastasios Pingios. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, it works. Okay, hello everyone. First of all, I know this might be a controversial topic because there is an active war going on, so please try to approach it from the technical perspective. And of course, what I'm talking about is about Ukraine and Russia, but at the same time, every single government out there has a similar capability. So keep this in mind. Let's try to remove emotions from this presentation. Of course, this is a personal research. It has nothing to do with my employer. I think, yeah, that's pretty obvious. And now, going back to the main subject. Let's see, can you raise your hand if you know what's happening in this video? Okay, a couple of hands. So what you see in this video is the Ukrainian security service, known as the SBU, raiding a bot farm, as they call them. And that was operated actually by the Russian special services to conduct information operations. So this could be the topic of this presentation, how this was happening, the two sides. And of course, as we'll see, it's not only Russia that's doing that, it's a practice that's used by other countries too. So on one side, we have the Ukrainian SBU. If we talk about the actors, what's happening on the other side? And to understand that, we need to go a little bit back. So we had the Soviet Union with all of the member states, and as you know, the KGB was handling anything security related, from border control to internal security, foreign operations, anything you can imagine. And for this presentation, the most interesting part is this one. They call it the fifth department, they were calling it, or political internal security. And that transition to what we have today. So what happened after the collapse of the Soviet Union? There were a lot of iterations to split all of the responsibilities that the KGB had to multiple different agencies. And the ones that are more relevant for this talk is the one you see on the left side is the SVR, the Foreign Intelligence Service, and the one you see in the middle is called the FSB, the Federal Security Service. In theory, how it should work is that anything outside of Russia should be handled by the SVR, anything inside Russia by the FSB. Practically, it doesn't work like that. Practically, what happened is that anything that was in the former Soviet Union states became a responsibility of the SVR, of the FSB. So for our talk, SVR is entirely out of scope. And you see that I didn't mention that all about the GRU that you might be hearing a lot in the news. GRU is the military intelligence, and why I didn't mention that is that GRU existed before the Soviet Union, and it continues to exist today, of course, with a different scope. That means for this talk, on one side we have the SBU of Ukraine, and on the other side we have the FSB with a GRU, since we have the war going on. The fifth service became part of the FSB, and all of the informal networks, all of the resources, everything they had in all of the former member states became a responsibility of them. And there are also a few other units that are actively involved in the activities I'm going to be covering. So when I'm talking about the two sides, these are the two sides I'm referring to. Now, in terms of the process, so how things actually work for those bot farms. If there are two practices in parallel, but the one that's more relevant for this talk is this one. First, the FSB or GRU, mainly through this fifth service, they identify some tech-savvy people that are able to do these things. They help them on how to set those up. They get the payments either on some sanctioned system or through cryptocurrencies. They buy this equipment mainly from Chinese marketplaces that we all know of. Those are perfectly legal to buy in most countries, so there is nothing illegal. And they are very cheap from those marketplaces, so this is why they buy those there. And then they start using them. In parallel to that, there is also another group of people that they are not starting with this approach. Instead, they are purely financially motivated. They see that they can actually sell this service to both cyber criminals and state actors, and they develop those, and they rent them out in a pay-as-you-go model. This is how the theory works. In practice now, the architecture is very simple. It's basically a few computers with some SMS gateways and a few other software to manage those systems. some GSM modems that anyone can buy, and basically what you see over there, you can think of it as each slot is a separate mobile phone. That's the easiest way to describe it. And as you see, each one of them has a different antenna because they need to connect to the phone network. And when they connect to the phone network, they can do anything that any mobile phone can do. They can make calls, they can send SMS messages, they can sign up to internet applications, more or less anything that any phone can do. The issue is that they can do it at scale. And when we're talking at scale, we're talking about large scale. This is another example of disrupted operations, and you can see what we're talking about. And this is the main limiting factor in those activities, the amount of SIM cards that you need. Because each phone number, well, you can have all of those gateways, but you need a lot of SIM cards. You need buckets of SIM cards. All of those are from raids that have happened. Thousands and thousands of SIM cards. So this is one of the hardest things to acquire for these operations to run. The rest of the equipment is relatively simple, but to get this amount of SIM cards, it's not that trivial. And when it comes to how people install them, there is the whole spectrum of what you can imagine, from really small installations, like what you see here, that there are maybe, I don't know, a couple of dozens of devices, to some other one that they also try to hide it, and maybe it's close to a window so that it have better coverage, because again, it needs to connect to the GSM network. And you can also see they had initially covered them with plastic bags so that they are not visible of all of the blinking lights. There are some even smaller ones that can be easily hidden in different places that they have been discovered. Some more innovative, let's say, with a lot of standalone dongles. Each dongle is again a GSM device. And even much larger installations like this one, where you see all of the dongles in a roof so that they can have good coverage and they can be used. Any of those things are used for the same purpose. So although there are different installations, practically it's the same infrastructure. Now, how they are being used? Okay, we learned who is using them, who are the two sides, what's happening, but why do they use them? The examples are there are thousands of examples of such activities. Almost all of them are used to set up fake social media accounts, and then whoever controls them, either cyber criminals, or in this case, the example we're seeing is from the GRU and the FSB, is either to, let's say, make real news that are out there more popular. Let's say it's a story that fits into the Russian plans, the Russian media, so they're going to propagate it by sharing it, and making it more popular. The other is actually sharing their own stories. Also creating and operating large groups. So let's say you create a group and suddenly you get thousands of likes in that group, a lot of people sharing that, so it becomes more popular. The other, which is the more traditional, not only from Russia, also the US and other countries have been doing the same where they are getting involved, is to do psychological information operations, which means sending mass SMS messages or calls, either with disinformation or asking people to surrender, or like there's going to be an imminent attack, you have to move out, otherwise you are an enemy. Anything you can fit into the PSYOP and IO space. And those are examples of what you see on the screenshots on the right. A very interesting other use is the covert communications channel. So basically, when they have a group that they don't want to be associated with operators from Russia or vice versa, they can use this as a proxy, so more or less have those as intermediates, so that you don't know who is on the other side. You only know up to the first hop. And again, can be used to set up Telegram channels and other things. A very interesting case, because this one, quite a few military operations, the moment the operations were happening, those were used to do denial of service attacks and flooding attacks on a government service. So let's say, for instance, there is a city that's going to be raided, and you start a denial of service attack on all of the emergency response numbers of that city. So which means if people try to reach them, they will not be able to reach them. This is another use that has been seen from those. The other is, of course, to target specific individuals, basically to hack them. So send them, let's say, phishing links, send them SMS messages with malware, more or less ways to get access to their devices. And of course, at the moment, Ukraine, I don't know how many know that, but there is an extreme amount of censorship, because of course they want to control what goes out of the country, because there is a lot of, there is a war going on. So some of these people also sell those to specific groups inside Ukraine to bypass all of this control and go directly to the internet, again, use them as proxies. So pretty massive amount of different use cases. And, and I had a translation of what those means in case anyone wants to see. It is very traditional PSYOP messages. You will find them in any war. Any country uses the same approach, so it's nothing unusual. The unusual part is the technical implementation of all of that. Of course, all of that has also some limitations. So first of all, as I mentioned, it needs a lot of SIM cards. Thousands and thousands of them. And also, even if you have all of this setup, you still need to know who to target. Who are you going to send this message to? So somehow you also need to collect a lot of lists of target phone numbers. And of course, this is not done by the people that operate the infrastructure. As I mentioned, those are paid for this service. All of that part is done by the people that are using this infrastructure, that are typically the Russian special services for this scenario. The other part is that they are relatively easy to discover if you are a government of a country. If you operate all of the telecommunication providers, it's not that hard to pick up that in a certain region, suddenly you have 20,000 new mobile phones popping up in the GSM network. Not to mention, if you just have other people, let's say, doing patrols with IMSI catchers, and suddenly they see in an area a huge amount of phones, again, it's not that hard to find those out, but at the same time, it's really cheap and fast to set those up. So, yeah. And the other part that is not limited to this operation, but general to the information operation space, it's really hard to measure the success. So let's say that you use this, you send out spam messages to everyone living in that region. How do you know that it worked? In some examples, they might have cases that, okay, X amount of people went back to us and they want to become informants or whatever. I mean, by us, I mean the Russians in this scenario. As the operators. But in general, it's very hard to measure the success of that. Actually, in the US, they are trying a different model, which is when they send information operation messages, at the same time to monitor the activity of those users to see if it changed their behavior in any way. I don't know if Russians are doing something similar. Maybe they do. And the other is for anyone to get recruited and operate something like that, they need to have a certain level of technical expertise. It's not anything extreme as you saw, but still, it's not something that the average citizen could do easily. And now on the main topic of the presentation. So throughout this time, the SBU has been publicizing anytime they disrupt these networks, apparently because it is good to demonstrate what they are doing, why they're doing that. And that gives us an insight into the scale of this activity. So since February 2022, and that's of course when the invasion started, and this is why I started with this statistic, there were 47 such networks, and SBU calls them bot farms. Technically, they are like cellular networks that operate outside of the telecommunication provider. In total, they had over 2 million online accounts and over 65,000 SIM cards that were being used. And in case you wonder like how they are separated, it's more or less in every major city of the country. So it's not isolated to a certain area. Now, the interesting part is not this one, because this is, I assume, expected. The issue is what happened before February 2022. And actually, such networks have been getting disrupted for quite some time, until since 2020, basically. So 2 years before anything happened in terms of the invasion. And it was interesting to see what they were being used for. And depending on the region, the whole point it was to create divisive subjects and the very pro-Russian view to the local population. So for instance, when there was a lot of division over the vaccination, there were a lot of messages related to COVID. Like, for instance, do the vaccination or not do the vaccination, depending on the audience. Or, for instance, in the Luhansk and Donetsk region, it was again that those need to get support from Russia in order to become autonomous region, a lot of these messages. So you can think of it, the whole point it was how to get more people on board on these topics. A very clear example of information operations, actually. And if we map those two, from 2020, you can see that, yeah, there are a few more regions. also including Luhansk and Donetsk that didn't have any before that. Actually, the latest one that was disrupted was only 2 weeks ago. And in 2023, because it's not really visible from that graph, there have been 3 disruptions so far. And yeah, the vast majority, you see 37.5% is in Kiev. And on average, we're talking about 9,300 SIM cards per farm. Almost all of them are used for these kind of things that I mentioned, information operations and psychological operations. But there are a few of them, that's the exception, that they are used for all of the other scenarios that I mentioned. Proxies, covert communication channels, and so on. But, okay, I covered how this works, but is this actually known? Hasn't been used before that? And the reality is yes. So I found this case from 2017, where the Turkish spy agency called MIT, they were using exact same setup to have a covert communication channel in Egypt, and it was disrupted by the Egyptian government. And also a very similar one in 2016 and 2020 in Pakistan, again the borders with, it was used for activities in the borders with India. So it is nothing new, and it's not only Russia that's doing that. It looks like it's a wider practice. Now, other countries using that? Maybe. Maybe a topic for future research or somebody in here if they want to look into that. And another interesting part of this one is this. This is actively being discussed in the British government. It's an open consultation called Preventing the Use of SIM Farms for Fraud. And they want to regulate any sort of GSM device that can accept more than 4 SIM cards. You can see it on the top, on the bottom here, which says our plan is to apply the measure only to devices with more than 4 slots. And the interesting part is here that they say that they have observed in the UK those devices being used to send scam messages, run scam call campaigns, and post misleading, false, or phishing messages on social media in bulk. So you can also see that it's not only used for state actors' activities, also used for cyber criminals, and also not only in war zones, but even in the United Kingdom. And if you have been following the news and you saw the recent leaks of the US government, well, the alleged leaks, the court hasn't completed on that case yet, you might have also seen this document that is quite interesting. As you see on the left here, that's the insignia of the US Cyber Command, and this is the counterpart from Ukraine. And they have this, what's called refining information operation capabilities via social media manipulation tool. And they refer that Russia is operating a tool built in-house called Fabrica that is managing a network of hundreds of thousands of social media bots emulating users to evade detection and manipulate the information environment. This potentially could be the management console of these bot farms that I talked about. Of course, there is no technical indicator that connects this to the bot farms, but logically speaking, it sounds like a plausible scenario. As you saw, there are a lot of unknowns, and there is a lot of space for additional research, so everyone is welcome to contribute to that. And with that, yeah, thanks a lot. And if you want to reach out to me, of course, you can do it here or in any of those links listed in this slide.
Anastasios, thank you very much. Do we have any question at this time? We do.
Very good presentation, thank you. You mentioned that there are thoughts on how to prevent using these SIM farms as these bots to prevent these information operations. But these are the end devices that are used to initiate it. Are there any countermeasures on the user account levels, on the social platforms that are being used to detect these fake accounts and prevent them from being used?
That could be, well, on the real end user. So if we're talking about, let's say, the recipient, I would say it's very tricky because you cannot really know if an account is legitimate or not. On the social media platforms, maybe, but I don't have access to this information. I assume that to do that at this scale, they have some automation. I also assume, based on my experience on dealing with bots in all of my professional career, that they try to randomize the fingerprints. Now, how far are they going to that? And especially on social media platforms, they always have this balance of finding bots and killing them, and keeping that balance to not killing real legitimate users. So it's, I know these days they are using a lot of technologies and machine learning, smarter fingerprints, taking more variables into account, but I have no idea how this is going to be. The easiest part is for telecommunication providers that get the initial stage of that, when those devices connect to the network.
Thank you.
Anybody with anything else at this time? Okay, you can reach out to Anastasios at any time during the day, and you'll be able to reach him also by email. Again, Anastasios, thank you very much.
Thank you.